The City of Ember, Chapter 13, Deciphering the Message. Dune headed for home, and Lena went in the opposite direction, across Harkin Square. The little group of believers had gone, but the protesters with their signs continued to pace back and forth. A few of them were still shaking their fists in the air and yelling, but most of them trapped, silently, looking tired and discouraged. Lena felt a bit that way too. Once Dune said he'd seen a door, she was sure that the door that he had found and the door in the instructions were the same. She had had such hopes for that door in the pipeworks, but hoping so hard had made her jump to conclusions. She'd gone a little too fast. She always went fast. Sometimes it was a good thing, and sometimes not. Now Dune thought the instructions were nothing important after all. She didn't want him to be right. She didn't believe he was even now. But her thoughts felt like a mess of tangled yarn. She needed someone wise and sensible to help her sort things out. She headed for Gloam Street. Though it was nearly 6 o'clock, she found Clary still in her workroom at the far end of greenhouse number 1. It was a small, crowded room. Pots and trowels cluttered the high end at one table. Above the table were shelves full of bottles of seeds and boxes of string, wire, and various kinds of powders. Clary's desk was a rickety table littered with scraps of paper, all of them covered with notes in her neat, round handwriting. 2 rickety chairs went with the rickety table, one on each side. Lena sat down facing Clary. "I have to tell you some important things," she said, "and they're all secret." "All right," said Clary, "I can keep secrets." She was wearing a patched shirt that had faded from blue to gray. Her short, brown hair was tucked behind her ears, and a bit of leaf clung to it on the right side. She folded her arms in front of her on the desk. She looked square and solid. "The first thing is," Lena began, "that I found the instructions, but Poppy had chewed them up." "The instructions?" said Clary. "I'm not familiar with them." Lena explained. She went on to explain everything, how she'd shown the instructions to Dune, what they had figured out, how he'd searched the pipeworks and found the door, and what he'd seen when he opened the door. Clary made an unhappy sound and shook her head. "This is very bad," she said, "and sad, too. I remember when the mayor was first starting out. He always had been foolish, but not always wicked. I'm sorry to know that the worst side of him is worn out." Clary's dark brown eyes seemed to grow deeper and sadder. "There is so much darkness in Ember, Lena. It's not just outside, it's inside us, too. Everyone has some darkness inside. It's like a hungry creature. It wants and wants and wants with a terrible power, and the more that you give it, the bigger and hungrier it gets." Lena knew. She had felt it in Looper's shop as she hovered over the colored pencils. For a moment she felt sorry for the mayor. His hunger had grown so big it could never be satisfied. His huge body couldn't contain it. It made him forget everything else. Clary let out a long breath, and a few of the scraps of paper on her desk fluttered. She ran her fingers through her hair, felt a bit of leaf, and plucked it out. Then she said, "About these instructions." "Oh, yes," said Lena. "They might be important or they might not be. I don't know anymore. I'd like to see them if you'd let me." "Of course you can see them, but you'll have to come home with me." "I'll come now, if that's all right," said Clary. "There's plenty of time left before lights out." Lena led Clary up the stairs and into her new bedroom at Mrs. Murdo's. "Nice room," Clary said, looking around with interest. "And I see you have a sprout." "A what?" said Lena. "Your bean," said Clary, pointing at the little pot of dirt on the windowsill. Lena bent to see what Clary was talking about. Sure enough, the dirt was heaving up a little bit. She touched the pushed up part, brushed away the dirt, and discovered a pale green loop. It looked like a net, as if a creature in the bean were trying to escape but hadn't yet managed to pull its head out. Of course she already knew that plants grew from seeds, but to have put that flat white bean in the dirt, to have almost forgotten about it, and now to see it forcing its way up through the air. "It's doing it," she said. "It's coming to life." Clary nodded, smiling. "It still amazes me every time I see it," she said. Lena brought out the instructions, and Clary sat down at the table to study them. She puzzled over the patchwork of scraps for a long time, tracing the lines with her finger, murmuring the parts of words. "What you figured out seems right so far to me," she said. "I think Ipwork must be pipeworks, and Iverink must be riverbank. So this bit must be down riverbank, and then there's a big space here, to edge. Edge of what, I wonder? And does it mean down riverbank, as in walk alongside the river?" "Yes, I think so," Lena said. "Or does it mean go down the riverbank itself, down the bank toward the water? Maybe edge means edge of the water." "It couldn't mean that. The bank goes straight down like a wall. You couldn't go down to the edge of the water, you'd fall in. Lena pictured the dark, swift water and shivered. This word, said Clary, putting a finger on the paper. Maybe it isn't edge at all. Maybe it's something else. It could be hedge or pledge. Those don't make much sense, but it could be ledge or wedge. Lena saw that Clary was no better at deciphering the puzzle than she was. She sighed and sat down on the edge of her bed. It's hopeless, she said. Clary straightened up quickly. Don't say that. This torn-up piece of paper is the most hopeful thing I've ever seen. Do you know what the word is? She pointed to the word at the top of the paper. Egress? Someone's name, isn't it? The title would be like Instructions for Egreston or Egressman or something like that. The person the instructions were for? I don't think so, said Clary. If you add an S to the word right where the tear in the paper is, you get egresses. Do you know what that means? No, said Lena. It means the way out. It means the exit. The title of this document is Instructions for Egress. When Clary left, there was still over an hour before lights out. Lena raced across the city to Green Gate Square. She glanced in the window of the small item shop where Dune's father was reaching for something on a shelf, and then she dashed up the stairs and knocked on the door of Dune's apartment. Right away, she heard quick steps, and Dune opened the door. I have something exciting to tell you, Lena said breathlessly. Come in, then. Lena went across the cluttered room to stand by a lamp. She pulled from her pocket a tiny piece of paper on which she had written egress. Look at this word, she said. It's from the title of the instructions. Someone's name, said Dune. No, said Lena. It means egress, with 2 S's. I showed the instructions to Clary, and she told me that. It means the way out. The way out, cried Dune. Yes, the way out, the exit. It's instructions for the way out of Ember. So it is real, Dune said. It is. We have to figure out the rest, or as much as the rest as possible. Can you come now? He darted into his room, emerged with his jacket, and they ran. All right, said Lena. They were on the floor of the blue-green room at Mrs. Murdo's. Let's take the first line. She moved her finger along it slowly. Ex, iv, ip, orc. We know that ip work is pipe work, she said. Ex could be expand or explore or expose. There's a big space between exp and the rest, said Dune. There must be more words in there, but who knows what they are. Let's move on. Lena swept her strangly hair impatiently back from her face. Look at number 2. Stone marked with E by edge. Lena put her finger on stun. What could that be? Maybe piston, said Dune. There's part of a machine, like the generator, or maybe it's astonish, or it could be. I bet it's just plain stone, said Lena. There's a lot of stone in the pipeworks. Dune had to admit that this was probably right. So then, he said, it would be stone marked with E. He frowned at the next bit. This must be river's edge. Stone marked with E by the river's edge. They looked at each other in delight. E for egress, said Lena. E for exit. They bent over the document again. There's not much left on the next line, said Dune. 3. Added down Iver Inc. to edge app 8 low. Just this part, which must say down riverbank to edge something. Edge of water would make most sense. But right after edge, there's app. What would that be? Dune sat back on his heels and gazed up at the ceiling, as if the answer might be there. Lena muttered, down river bank to edge? Edge? She thought of Clary's guesses about the line. Maybe it's ledge, she said, down riverbank to ledge. There could be a ledge down there near the water. Yes, that must be right. There's a stone marked with E, and down the riverbank at that point there's a ledge. I think we're getting it. Once again they crouched over the page, their heads close together. Okay, Dune said, line 4. Axe to the fine door of Boo Cur Key, hind small steel pan, the right rim E open do. This is where it says door, said Lena. Somewhere the door is by the ledge. Does that make sense? And there's the small steel pan. What can that mean? What would a pan have to do with anything? But look, said Lena as she tapped the paper urgently. Here it says key, and here it says E. It's talking about a key. But what is it a door to, said Dune, sitting back. Remember, we thought about this before. A door in the bank of the river would lead under the pipeworks. Lena pondered this. Maybe it leads to a long tunnel that goes out way beyond Ember and then gradually up and up and up until it comes out at the other city. What other city? Said Dune. He glanced up at the drawings tacked on the wall of Lena's room. Oh, he said, you mean that city? Well, it could be. Dune shrugged. I suppose so, or it could be another city exactly like this one. That was a gloomy thought. Both of them felt their spirits sink a little at that idea. So they turned back to the task of deciphering. Next line, said Lena. But Dune sat back on his heels again. He stared into the air, half smiling. I have an idea, he said. If we do find the way out, we'll need to announce it to everyone. Wouldn't it be splendid to do it during the singing? Stand up there in front of the whole city and say we found it? It would be, said Lena, but that's only 2 days away. Yes, we have to hurry. They were bending again over the glued-down fragments when Dune remembered that he should check the time. It was 9:15. He barely had time to get home. Come again tomorrow, said Lena, and while you're at work, look for a rock marked with E. That night, Dune had trouble sleeping. He couldn't find a comfortable position on his bed. It seemed to be made up of nothing but lumps and wrinkles, and it squeaked and groaned every time he moved. He flailed around so much that the noise woke his father, who came to his room and asked, What is it, son? Nightmares? No, said Dune. Just can't sleep. Are you worrying, frightened, or of anything? Dune wanted to say, Yes, father. I'm worried because the mayor of our city is taking for himself the things that people need, and I'm afraid because any day our lights could go out forever. I'm worried and afraid a lot of the time, but I'm also excited because I think there is a way out, and we might find it, and all those feelings are whirled around inside my head, which makes it hard to sleep. He could have told his father everything. His father would have plunged in with great enthusiasm. He would have helped them decipher the instructions and expose the mayor's thievery. He could even come down into the pipeworks and help search for the rock marked with E. But Dune wanted to keep these things to himself for now. Tomorrow the guards would announce that an alert young boy had uncovered the mayor's crime, and his father, hearing the announcements, along with the rest of Ember, would turn to the person next to him and say, That's my son they're talking about, my son. No. So in answer to his father's question, he simply said, No, father, I'm all right. Well then, see if you can't lie still, said his father. Good night, son, he added, and he closed the door. Dune smoothed out his covers and pulled them up to his chin. He closed his eyes, but he still couldn't sleep. So he tried a method that had often worked for him before. He would choose a place he knew well, the school for instance, and imagine himself walking through it, picturing it as he went in minute detail. Often his thoughts would wander, but he would always bring them back to the imaginary journey, and something about them would often make him sleepy. That night he decided to retrace the explorations of the pipeworks. He held his mind to the task for a long time, picturing with all the clarity he could muster everything he had seen in that underground realm, the long stairway, the tunnels, the door, the path along the river, the rocks along the path. He felt sleep drawing closer, a heaviness in his limbs. But just as he was about to give in to it, he saw in his mind's eye the wrinkled rocks that bordered the river at the west end of the pipeworks. The rocks whose strange ridges and creases had reminded him of writing. His eyes flew open in the dark. His heart began to hammer, and he gave up on sleeping and lay in a state of terrible impatience for the rest of the night.